When Emily arrived at her father's house that Saturday morning, she heard something she hadn't heard in exactly 730 days. Laughter. It was coming from the garden. Emily stopped in the doorway. Her heart raced. That laugh that had died along with her mother Carol 2 years ago. That laugh that no psychologist, no medication, no therapy had been able to resurrect. She walked slowly towards the back of the house. Her heels clicked on the hardwood floor, but she didn't pay attention. She could only hear that laugh, her father's laugh. And when she reached the door that led to the garden, what she saw brought her to her knees. There was Mr. Abernathy, her father, the man who hadn't left his room in 2 years, the man who had stopped eating, stopped talking, stopped living since Carol passed away. He was kneeling in the dirt. His hands were covered in soil, planting flowers. And beside him, wearing the same blue uniform as always, was Hope. The housekeeper Emily had hired 6 months ago just to clean the house. Just to clean. But what Hope was doing had nothing to do with cleaning. If this story is touching your heart, stick around until the end, because what you're about to discover about Hope will change the way you see people who work in silence. Before I tell you what happened next, you need to understand who Mr. Abernathy was before the darkness consumed him. Mr. Abernathy was 79 years old. He had been an agricultural engineer for 45 years. His entire life had been dedicated to the land, to the plants, to making things grow where there had been nothing before. But his true passion wasn't his work, it was Carol. They met when he was 27 and she was 25. It was at an agricultural fair in Austin, Texas. She was selling flowers she grew in her grandmother's garden. He went to buy roses and ended up buying her heart. They got married 6 months later. It was a simple wedding in Carol's hometown church. They didn't have money for a big party, but they had plenty of love. Her mother lent her the dress. Her father gave her a bouquet of roses from the garden where she had learned to plant. That night, as they danced under the stars in the backyard of Carol's parents' house, Mr. Abernathy made her a promise. "I'm going to give you a garden," he said, "a garden where we grow together, like the flowers you love so much." Carol laughed and kissed him. She didn't know that that promise would be fulfilled for 50 years. The first few months of marriage were difficult. Mr. Abernathy worked long hours in the fields. Carol did laundry to earn extra money. They lived in a rented room that barely had space for a bed and a table, but every Sunday, without fail, they went for a walk together. And on every walk, Mr. Abernathy showed Carol plots of land for sale. "Someday," he'd say, "someday we're going to have our own house with our own garden." Carol smiled and squeezed his hand. "It doesn't matter how long it takes," she replied. "As long as we're together, I can wait my whole life." 5 years later, they finally saved enough. They bought a small house on the outskirts of the city. They didn't have much money, but they had love to spare. Carol turned the backyard into a garden. She started with a few roses, the same ones she sold when they met. But over time, the garden grew. It grew along with their marriage. Every anniversary, Mr. Abernathy gave her a new plant. The first anniversary was a white rose bush, the second, a yellow one, the third, a pink one. And so, year after year, the garden filled with colors. Carol taught him about the plants. He taught her about the soil. Together, they created something beautiful. When Emily was born, her first crib was surrounded by flowers. Carol said that children who grow up among plants grow with a greener soul, more alive, more connected with the earth. And Emily grew up in that garden. She took her first steps among the roses. She said her first words sitting in the grass. She learned to count using the tomatoes her father grew. It was a happy family. Not perfect, but happy. Emily was their only child. She was born when they were 30 years old. They raised her with love, with values, with the certainty that family was the most important thing. Emily grew up, studied, and became a successful businesswoman. Now she was the CEO of a pharmaceutical company. She had money, power, recognition. But she also had something that consumed her from within: guilt. Because while she was building her empire, her parents were growing old alone. Oh, she visited them once a month, sometimes twice. She sent them money. She paid for the best clinics, the best doctors. But time, that resource that can't be bought, that she didn't have. And then, exactly 730 days ago, Carol got sick. Pancreatic cancer, the most aggressive, the most cruel. 3 months, that's all she had. 3 months to say goodbye to 50 years of love. Emily took 2 weeks of leave, 2 weeks to accompany her mother in her final days. 2 weeks that weren't enough for anything. Carol died on a Tuesday at 6:47 in the morning. Mr. Abernathy was holding her hand. Emily was on a work call in the next room. She arrived 3 minutes late. 3 minutes. Her mother was already gone. And something in Mr. Abernathy died that same day. The first few days after the funeral. Emily thought it was normal. The grief, the sadness, the emptiness, those things take time. But the weeks passed, and Mr. Abernathy didn't get better. He stopped leaving his room. He stopped eating. He stopped talking. He stopped showering. He stopped living. The first signs were subtle. He left his food untouched. He said he wasn't hungry. He spent hours staring out the window at the garden, but never went outside. Then, he started staying in bed longer, first an extra hour, then 2, then all day. The nurses tried to get him up. They brought him breakfast in bed. They played music for him. They read him the newspaper. But Mr. Abernathy didn't respond. He just stared at the ceiling with empty eyes, as if his soul had left with Carol. Emily received calls every day. Your father didn't eat today. Your father didn't talk today. Your father didn't get up today. And each call was a knife in her heart. She wanted to be there. She wanted to drop everything and take care of her father. But she had a company to run. She had thousands of employees who depended on her. She had meetings she couldn't cancel, contracts she couldn't ignore. So she did the only thing she knew how to do: spend money. Emily hired nurses. She hired psychologists. She hired psychiatrists. She paid fortunes on medications, on therapies, on experimental treatments. Nothing worked. The first psychiatrist was a man with a grey beard and tired eyes. He'd spent 30 years treating depression. He looked at Mr. Abernathy, who was sitting on the bed staring at the wall, and sighed. "Mrs. Villarreal," he said to Emily in the hallway, "I've seen many cases of complicated grief. But your father, he doesn't want to get better. And there's no medicine in the world that can make someone want to live." Emily hired a second psychiatrist, and a third, and a fourth. They all said the same thing. She tried occupational therapy, hired a therapist who came 3 times a week. The woman brought board games, puzzles, coloring books. Mr. Abernathy didn't touch a thing. She tried music therapy, hired a violinist who played the songs that Carol loved. Mr. Abernathy closed his eyes and cried silently. But when the music ended, he returned to his catatonic state. She tried pet therapy, brought in a golden retriever puppy, one of those used in hospitals for depressed patients. The dog licked Mr. Abernathy's hand. The old man didn't react. The dog was returned 3 days later. Emily was spending thousands of dollars every month. She had the money. What she didn't have was the solution. One day, the lead psychiatrist called her into his office. "You need to prepare yourself," and he said, "Your father is giving up. It's something we sometimes see in widowers of long marriages. The body simply decides that it no longer wants to continue without the other person." Emily felt the world collapsing. "How long?" she asked. The doctor shook his head. "I don't know. Months, maybe a year. But if he continues to not eat, not move, not connect with anything, his body will collapse." That night, Emily cried in her car for an hour before she could drive home. The doctors had told her the truth, with soft but cruel words. Her father was giving up. There was no pill that could cure a broken heart. There was no therapy that could replace 50 years of love. And then, 6 months ago, Emily hired Hope. She didn't hire her to take care of her father. There were already nurses for that. She hired her to clean the house, which had become a reflection of Mr. Abernathy's state. Dirty, abandoned, dead. Hope Reyes was 48 years old. She had worked as a housekeeper her entire life. She had no college degrees, no certifications. She had nothing that made her special on paper. But Hope had something that no degree can give. She had a heart that understood pain. On her first day of work, Hope arrived at 7 in the morning. The house was silent. The nurses explained the situation. The man doesn't go out. The man doesn't talk. The man doesn't eat. Just leave him alone. Hope nodded and started cleaning. But while she cleaned, she observed the photo in the living room. A young man, in work overalls, smiling in a cornfield. Beside him, a beautiful woman holding a bouquet of roses. She observed the diplomas on the wall. Agricultural engineer, 45 years of service, awards for agricultural research. She observed the closed door of the master bedroom. Behind that door was a man who had dedicated his life to making things grow, and now he couldn't even make the desire to live grow. And then Hope observed something else. The garden, it was dead. The plants, dry. The flowers, withered. The earth, cracked. It was as if someone had abandoned that place a long time ago. Hope asked one of the nurses, "That garden, who did it belong to?" The nurse sighed. "It was Mrs. Carroll's. She took care of it every day. But since she died, no one has touched it. The man doesn't let anyone near it." Hope looked at the dead garden for a long time, and something inside her moved. If you believe that miracles don't exist, it's because you've never met someone like Hope. Keep listening. Hope had a secret, a pain she had carried for 26 years. When she was 22 years old, her father died. But he didn't die of illness. He didn't die in an accident. Her father gave up. Her mother had passed away a year earlier. Cancer. just like Carol and her father. A strong farmer who had worked the land his entire life simply stopped fighting. He stopped eating. He stopped talking. He stopped leaving the house. And Hope, young and scared, didn't know what to do. She thought it was normal. She thought time would heal it. She thought that one day her father would get up and be the same again. But that day never came. Her father died 8 months after her mother. The doctor said it was his heart, but Hope knew the truth. Her father died of sadness. He died because he didn't find a reason to keep living, and she never forgave herself. For 26 years, Hope carried that guilt. She carried it on her shoulders while cleaning other people's houses. She carried it in her chest while preparing meals for families that weren't hers. She carried it in her hands while washing marble floors that she would never walk on as the owner. I should have done something. I should have fought for him. I should have found a way to give him back the desire to live, but she didn't. Hope had thought about it thousands of times. What would have happened if she had insisted that he leave the house? What would have happened if she had taken him to the field where he loved to work? What would have happened if she had planted something with him, like they did when she was a child? But when you're young, you don't know. What you know when you're old. When you're young, you think that time fixes everything, that tomorrow will be better, that things will work themselves out. And then your father dies, and you discover that time doesn't fix anything if you don't do something with it. Hope had married at 24, had 2 children, worked her entire life, and never stopped thinking about her father. Every time she saw an old man alone in a park, she thought of him. Every time she cleaned the house of some rich family and saw photos of smiling grandparents, she thought of him. Every time the smell of wet earth reached her nose, she thought of him. Her father had loved the land, and Hope hadn't been able to save him, but she didn't. And when she saw Mr. Abernathy, when she saw that dead garden, when she saw the photo of the man smiling in the cornfield, something inside her said, enough. She wasn't going to let another father die of sadness. Not this time. The second week of work, Hope did something that wasn't in her contract. She went out to the garden, not to clean it, not yet, just to observe it. She knelt beside the dead plants, touched the dry earth, looked at the empty pots where roses had once bloomed. And then she noticed something. In a corner of the garden, there was a small shed. It was locked, but the lock was rusty. With a little effort, Hope managed to open it. Inside, she found gardening tools, shovels, rakes, gloves, seeds, so many seeds. There were packets and packets of seeds, tomatoes, peppers, pumpkins, flowers of every kind, and on a special shelf, protected like a treasure, red rose seeds. Hope picked up one of the packets. The label in cursive read, Carol, Spring 2022. These seeds had been saved by Carol. For a spring she would never see, Hope stared at those seeds for a long time. She thought about Carol, a woman she'd never met, but somehow understood. A woman who loved plants as much as her own father had loved the land. A woman who had saved seeds for a future that never came. And she thought about Mr. Abernathy, a man who had dedicated his life to growing things. An agricultural engineer who now couldn't even muster the will to get out of bed. There was a connection there. something no psychiatrist had seen, something no therapy had touched. Mr. Abernathy didn't need pills. He didn't need to talk about his feelings. He didn't need someone to tell him that time heals all wounds. He needed soil. He needed seeds. He needed to see something grow. He needed his garden back. Hope slipped the packet of seeds into her pocket. She stayed there in the shed for several minutes, looking at the tools Carol had used, touching the gardening gloves that still had soil from her hands clinging to them, reading the labels of the seeds she had saved for a spring that never arrived. And then Hope understood something. Carol had loved this garden. She had cared for it for 50 years. She had spent thousands of hours kneeling in this dirt, planting, watering, pruning, harvesting. And when she died, the garden died with her. But it didn't have to be that way. The garden could live again. And maybe, just maybe, if the garden came back to life, Mr. Abernathy could too. It was a crazy idea. Hope wasn't a gardener. She didn't have a degree in botany. She knew nothing about horticultural therapy or the psychology of grief. She was just a woman who cleaned houses, a woman who had lost her own father to the same invisible illness that was killing Mr. Abernathy. But sometimes, the least qualified people are the most capable because they don't bring theories or protocols. They just bring their heart. And from that day on, her job changed. She started arriving an hour before she was paid to. And she dedicated that hour to the garden. The first day, she pulled up the dead plants. It was hard work. Her hands filled with blisters, but she didn't care. The second day, she turned over the soil. She loosened it. She prepared it to receive new life. The third day, she planted the first seeds, tomatoes. She put them in the corner where the sun shone the brightest. The fourth day, she planted pumpkins and peppers and aromatic herbs. The fifth day, she arrived even earlier, at 5 a.m., when the sun was just starting to rise. She wanted to see how the light touched the plants. She wanted to feel that magical moment when darkness turns into day. The sixth day, she brought something from her house, a small, old radio that had belonged to her grandmother. She put it in the shed and started playing music while she worked. Old songs, ballads, country tunes. The music her father used to listen to while he worked in the fields. The nurses looked at her strangely. What was this cleaning lady doing in the garden at 5 a.m., listening to music and talking to herself? But no one said anything. No one asked anything. Because no one cared about the dead garden, no one except Hope. And as she planted, she sang. She sang old songs, songs that her grandmother had taught her when she was a little girl, songs of the land, of the fields, of the harvest. She sang softly, but loud enough for someone to hear, and someone did hear. The seventh day, while Hope was kneeling, planting sunflower seeds, she felt someone watching her. She looked up. In the window of the master bedroom, behind the curtain, there was a figure. Mr. Abernathy. He was looking at her. He didn't say anything. He didn't open the window. He didn't come outside. But for the first time in months, he was looking at something other than the walls of his room. Hope didn't say anything. She just kept planting and kept singing. But inside, her heart was beating with hope. She had found the door. Now she just needed to find the key. If you'd like more people to hear stories like this, share this video. Sometimes the algorithm hides the things we need to see the most. The weeks passed, and Hope developed a routine. She arrived at 6 a.m. instead of 7. That extra hour was for the garden. No one paid her for it. No one had asked her to do it, but she did it anyway. First, she watered the plants. The water was cold in the mornings, and her hands went numb. But she didn't care. Then she checked each plant, one by one. She looked for signs of pests. She removed the yellow leaves. She loosened the soil around the roots. And as she did all this, she talked. She talked to the plants. She told them stories. She told them about her childhood in the country. She told them about her father. She told them about the pain of losing him and the guilt of not having saved him. The plants didn't respond, of course, but Hope knew someone was listening. Because every day, at the same time, the curtain in the master bedroom window moved a little. Just a little, enough for someone to see without being seen. Hope never looked directly at the window. She never made eye contact. She never pressured him. She just kept working. She kept talking. She kept waiting. And the garden began to change. The first sprouts appeared. Small, fragile, but alive. And Mr. Abernathy kept watching, every day, at the same time. Hope saw him in the window. He never spoke, he never came outside, but he watched, and Hope kept singing. A month after the first sprouts appeared, something else happened, something Hope wasn't expecting. She was kneeling next to the tomatoes, removing some leaves that had withered, when she heard a sound behind her. The patio door opened. Hope froze. She didn't dare turn around. She just listened. She listened to the slow, shuffling footsteps of someone who hadn't walked in a long time. The footsteps stopped near her, not too close, about 10 feet away, as if the person was afraid to get any closer. Hope kept working. She didn't turn around. She didn't say anything. She just kept removing the dry leaves. As if nothing had happened. A minute passed, 2, 5, and then a voice, broken, rusted by months of silence, asked, "What song is that?" Hope almost fainted. It was the first time Mr. Abernathy had spoken to her. It was the first time he'd spoken to anyone in months. But he didn't show his surprise. He just slowly raised his head, as if it were the most normal thing in the world. "It's a song my grandma used to teach me," Hope replied softly. She would sing it when we worked in the fields together. Mr. Abernathy didn't say anything else. He just stood there, staring at the garden that had belonged to his wife. After a few minutes, he turned around and went back inside the house, but he had come outside. For the first time in months, he had left his room of his own free will. Hope waited for the door to close, and then, alone in the garden, she allowed herself to cry, not from sadness, from hope. One day, while watering the plants, she started talking to them, out loud, as if they were people. "Look how beautifully you're growing," she said to a tomato plant. "Your mother would be so proud of you." She wasn't just talking about the tomato plant. She was talking towards the window. Another day, while pruning some branches, she said, "You know, my dad loved plants. He was a farmer. He used to say that plants are like people. They need sun, water, and someone to take care of them." And then, looking towards the window without directly looking, she added, "And sometimes, when people wither, they need someone to care for them too." The nurses thought Hope was crazy, talking to herself in the garden, singing to the plants, arriving an hour early without getting paid extra. But Emily didn't know anything about this. Emily only came once a month, and when she came, Hope was already gone. Until that Saturday. But before we get to that moment, there's something else you need to know. 3 weeks before that Saturday, something important happened. Something the nurses never told Emily. Mr. Abernathy had fallen. He was in the garden, trying to reach a high branch on the rose bush, when he lost his balance. He fell backward onto the ground. He wasn't seriously hurt, just a few bruises. But for a 79-year-old man who had been bedridden for months, any fall is dangerous. Hope ran to him. She knelt beside him. She asked him if he was all right. And then Mr. Abernathy did something that left her speechless. He laughed, not a sad laugh, not a sarcastic laugh, a genuine laugh, a laugh of joy. "Carol always told me I was a disaster at pruning," he said while chuckling. She was right. Hope helped him up. Her hands were shaking, but Mr. Abernathy kept smiling. "Tomorrow, we'll prune together," he said. "You can show me how to do it right." And the next day, for the first time, Mr. Abernathy and Hope worked side by side in the garden, not as employer and employee, but as two people united by the earth, by the plants, by the love for someone who was no longer there. That was the day Hope knew she had succeeded, that Mr. Abernathy was going to live, and that was the day she decided it was time to plant the roses. Carol's roses. 4 months had passed since Hope started working in the garden. The garden was no longer dead. There were red tomatoes hanging from the plants, orange pumpkins growing on the ground, colorful flowers peeking out from the green, and in the center of the garden, in the place of honor, a rose bush, Carol's roses. When Hope decided to plant them, she knew it was a risk. The roses were the most sacred thing in that garden. They were the symbol of the love between Carol and Mr. Abernathy. Planting them wrong, letting them die, would be worse than never having planted them at all. But she also knew they were the key. If Mr. Abernathy saw Carol's roses bloom again, maybe something inside him would bloom too. Hope had planted them 2 months ago, in the exact spot where Carol used to have them. She used the seeds she found in the shed, the same seeds that Carol had kept with her own hand. It was the most difficult project in the garden. Roses are fickle. They need the exact amount of water. They need the exact amount of sun. They need precise pruning and specific nutrients. Hope didn't know any of this. She had to learn. She searched the neighborhood library for books on rose cultivation. She asked neighbors who had rose bushes in their gardens. She watched videos on her daughter's phone about how to care for the plants. And while she learned, she kept trying. The first seeds didn't sprout, neither did the second. Hope almost gave up. But then she remembered her father. She remembered how he never gave up when a harvest failed. She remembered how he would plant again and again until something grew. And she kept trying every night when she got home after a day of work. Hope reviewed her notes about the roses. She read and reread the books she had taken out from the library. She practiced in her mind every step of the process. Her husband watched her, worried. She'd been obsessed for weeks with that garden that wasn't even hers, that old man who wasn't even her family. "Why do you care so much?" he asked her one night. Hope looked at him with eyes that held 26 years of guilt. "Because once I did nothing," she replied, "and my father died. I'm not going to make the same mistake twice." Her husband didn't say anything else. He just hugged her and let her keep trying. The third time, a small green sprout emerged from the earth. Hope was kneeling next to the pot where she had planted the seeds. The sun was barely rising. The air was cold and damp. And there, among the dark soil, was a spot of green, a new life. Hope almost cried with joy. She cared for that sprout as if it were a baby. She protected it from excessive sun. She protected it from nightly frosts. She spoke to it every morning, telling it stories of Carol, stories she had heard from the nurses, stories of the 50 years of love between her and Mr. Abernathy, and the sprout grew. It became a stem. The stem grew branches. The branches grew leaves. And finally, after months of care, a bud appeared. Hope sang different songs to the roses than to the other plants. Love songs, farewell songs, songs she imagined Carol would have sung. And that morning, for the first time, a rose had bloomed. Red, perfect, like the ones Carol used to grow. Hope cut it carefully. She put it in a small vase she had found in the shed. And then she did something she had never done before. She knocked on the door of Mr. Abernathy's room. No one answered. Hope left the vase with the rose in front of the door and went back to working in the garden. An hour later, she heard a sound behind her. Footsteps. She turned around slowly, and there he was, Mr. Abernathy, standing in the garden, with the rose in his hand. His eyes were full of tears, but they weren't tears of sadness, they were tears of something else. Something Hope hadn't seen in a long time. Recognition. Mr. Abernathy looked at the rose. He looked at the garden. He looked at Hope. And then he spoke. For the first time in months, he spoke. She loved them, he said. His voice was raspy, almost inaudible, as if his vocal cords had forgotten how to function. Hope nodded. I know. Mr. Abernathy walked slowly toward the rose bush. He knelt in front of it. He touched the petals with trembling fingers, and then, without saying anything else, he began to remove the dead leaves. He began to care for the rose bush. Hope knelt beside him, and together, in silence, they cared for Carol's roses. That was the first time, but it wasn't the last. From that day on, Mr. Abernathy began to go out to the garden every day. At first, he just stood near the door, as if he were afraid to enter completely. He watched Hope work. He watched the plants grow, but he didn't say anything. Hope didn't say anything to him either. She didn't ask him how he was. She didn't try to make conversation. She just worked, sang, and occasionally made a comment about the plants. Look, Mr. Abernathy, the tomatoes already have flowers. Soon they'll bear fruit. Or, this pumpkin is growing very fast. I think it's going to be the biggest in the garden. Or, Mrs. Abernathy's rose bush needs a little more water. Roses are demanding, but when they bloom, there's nothing more beautiful. She always mentioned Carol, always, as if she wanted Mr. Abernathy to know that she hadn't been forgotten, that her garden hadn't been forgotten, that their love hadn't been forgotten. And little by little, something began to change in Mr. Abernathy. A week after he first went outside, Hope saw him bend down, not to plant, just to touch the soil. He let the soil slide between his fingers, as if he were remembering something. Hope kept working without looking directly at him, but inside, she was smiling. The following week, Mr. Abernathy picked up a watering can. He didn't say anything. He just started watering the plants that were closest to him. Hope had to hold back tears. And the week after that, for the first time in 730 days, Mr. Abernathy spoke more than 3 words in a row. He said, Carol used to plant red roses in that corner. They were her favorites. Hope nodded. I know, Mr. Abernathy. That's why I planted them there. The old man looked at her for a long moment. Then, something that might have been a smile crossed his face. Thank you, he said, and he continued watering. What you're about to hear is the moment that changed everything. If you've connected with this story, tap the heart. Not for the algorithm, for you. From that day on, Mr. Abernathy went out to the garden every morning. At first, he just stood there observing. Then he started touching the plants. Then he started helping with the watering. And eventually, he started planting. Hope never told him what to do. She never gave him instructions. She just worked beside him, in silence, singing her old songs. And little by little, Mr. Abernathy began to change. He started eating, not much, but something. The nurses were surprised. He asked for eggs with tomatoes from the garden. He started talking, few words, but words. He asked Hope about the plants, about the seeds, about when the sunflowers would bloom. He started leaving his room, not just to the garden, to the living room, to the kitchen, to life. The psychiatrists couldn't believe it. They called Emily to give her the news. Her father was improving. No one knew why, but he was improving. Emily decided to come and see it with her own eyes. That Saturday morning. And that brings us back to the moment where we started. Emily kneeling at the garden gate, her father planting flowers, smiling. For the first time in 730 days, Emily stood there frozen for what seemed like an eternity. Tears ran down her cheeks. She couldn't believe what she was seeing. Hope saw her first. She stood up slowly, wiping her hands on her apron. "Mrs. Emily," she said softly. Mr. Abernathy looked up. He saw his daughter, and his smile grew bigger. "Honey," he said, "come see your mother's roses." Emily walked toward the garden as if she were in a dream. She knelt beside her father. She looked at the red roses, perfect, blooming where before there had only been dead earth. "How?" was the only thing she could say. "Dad, how is this possible?" Mr. Abernathy looked at Hope. "She did it," he said. "She brought them back to life." Emily turned to Hope. She looked at her with eyes that didn't understand. "Why?" she asked. "Why did you do all this? I'm not paying you for this. It's not your job." Hope was silent for a moment. Then she sat down on the grass, next to the family she had helped to heal. "When I was 22 years old," Hope said, "my mother died. Cancer. Just like Mrs. Abernathy." Emily and Mr. Abernathy listened in silence. "My father was a farmer. He loved the land. He loved the plants. He loved my mother more than anything in the world. And when she died, he stopped living." Hope looked at the sky, as if searching for the right words. "I was young. I didn't know what to do. I thought time would heal him. I thought that someday he would get up and go back to being the same, but I didn't do anything. I didn't fight for him. I didn't find a way to give him back the will to live." Her voice broke a little. "He died 8 months later. The doctors said it was his heart, but I know the truth. He died of sadness, and I didn't do anything to save him." Tears were now running down Hope's face too. "When I saw Mr. Abernathy, when I saw this dead garden, when I saw the photo of him smiling in the cornfield, something inside me said that I couldn't let it happen again. I couldn't let another father die of sadness while I just watched." She looked at Mr. Abernathy directly. "I'm not a psychologist. I'm not a therapist. I don't have any degree that tells me how to heal people. I just have hands willing to get dirty and a heart that understands what it's like to lose someone." Mr. Abernathy took Hope's hand. His eyes were also full of tears. "Carol would have loved this garden," he said. "Thank you. Thank you for bringing her back to me." Emily couldn't speak. She just cried. She cried for her mother. She cried for her father. She cried for the 2 years she had lost being too busy to be present. And she cried for Hope, for this woman who had carried her own guilt for 26 years and had found a way to heal it by healing another. Emily looked at her father. She really looked at him, maybe for the first time in years. She saw the new wrinkles on his face. She saw the hands stained with dirt. She saw the eyes that, although still sad, had a sparkle that had been absent for 730 days. And then she understood something. Emily had spent thousands of dollars on doctors and therapists. She'd hired the best professionals in the country. She'd bought the most expensive medications, the most innovative therapies, the most promising treatments. But what her father needed couldn't be bought with money. He needed soil in his hands. He needed seeds to plant. He needed to see something grow in the same place where Carol had spent so many happy hours. He needed someone who understood the pain of losing the love of your life. And that's not something you can buy at any pharmacy. That day, Emily didn't go back to her office. She stayed in the garden with her father and Hope. She took off her heels. She got her knees dirty. She planted her first seeds in 25 years. They planted together. They laughed together. They cried together. And when the sun went down, Mr. Abernathy did something he hadn't done in 730 days. He got up from the porch swing where he'd been resting and walked toward the kitchen. His steps were slow, a little unsteady, like those of a child learning to walk again. Emily watched him, not daring to say anything. She didn't want to break the spell. She didn't want to do anything that might scare her father back into the darkness. Mr. Abernathy opened the refrigerator. He took out some eggs. He took out butter. He went to the garden and cut 3 perfect tomatoes, ripe, red as Carol's roses. And then, for the first time in 2 years, he turned on the stove. He cooked. It was something simple, scrambled eggs with garden tomatoes, but for Emily, it was the best dish she'd ever tasted in her life, because it wasn't just food, it was life. It was hope. It was the first step of a man who had decided to live again. Mr. Abernathy cut the tomatoes carefully. The same tomatoes that Hope had planted 4 months ago. The same tomatoes that he had watered while he was learning to breathe again. As he cooked, he talked about Carol. He told how she made scrambled eggs in a special way, how she added a little cilantro and a touch of chili powder, how she sang while she cooked. Emily listened with tears in her eyes. It had been 2 years since her father had spoken of her mother. It had been 2 years since Carol's name was taboo in that house, but now, for the first time, Mr. Abernathy could remember her with love instead of grief. He could talk about her with a smile instead of tears. The grief hadn't disappeared. 50 years of love aren't overcome in 4 months. But something had changed. The grief was no longer a prison. Now it was a garden, a place where memories could blossom when they finished dinner. Mr. Abernathy got up from the table. He walked over to an old cabinet in the corner of the dining room. He opened a drawer and took something out. It was a photo album. He put it on the table and opened it. Emily held her breath. It had been 2 years since anyone had opened that album. It had been 2 years since the photos of Carol had been put away, hidden, as if seeing them would be too painful. But Mr. Abernathy turned the pages with a smile. He showed the photos of their wedding, the photos of Emily when she was a baby, the photos of the garden in different seasons, the photos of Carol smiling, always smiling. "This was her," he said, pointing to a photo where Carol was kneeling next to her roses. "She was the most beautiful woman in the world." Emily looked at the photo with tears in her eyes. She remembered that day. She had taken that photo. She was 15 years old and had just received her first camera. And now, 37 years later, that photo was in front of her again, and her father could look at it without breaking down. That was a miracle. A small, quiet miracle, but a miracle nonetheless. Hope ate with them that night. For the first time, not as an employee, as a friend, as family. If this story stirred something within you, I invite you to do something. Not for me, for you. Think of that person who is going through a difficult time, and ask yourself what small gesture you could make to restore their will to live. 6 months have passed since that Saturday. The garden is now the most beautiful in the neighborhood. There are tomatoes, pumpkins, peppers, aromatic herbs. There are sunflowers that are 6 feet tall. And in the center, Carol's rose garden, with dozens of red roses blooming. Mr. Abernathy goes out to the garden every day. At 6 in the morning, when the sun is just rising, he's already there, watering, pruning, planting new things. He's not completely healed yet. Depression doesn't disappear that easily. And he's still taking his medication. He's still seeing his therapist. He's still having difficult days. There are mornings when he doesn't want to get up. There are afternoons when the pain hits him like a wave. There are nights when he dreams of Carol and wakes up with a broken heart. But now, when those mornings come, he has something that gets him out of bed. When the garden, the plants that need water, the tomatoes that need to be harvested, the roses that need to be pruned. Carol is gone, but her garden is not. And as long as that garden is alive, a part of her is still alive too. That's what Mr. Abernathy understood, and that's what saved him. The therapist who treats him now says it's a remarkable case. Horticultural therapy, he calls it. Therapy with plants. It's nothing new, but it rarely works as well as it worked with Mr. Abernathy. The therapist wrote an article about the case. He published it in a medical journal. Other doctors read it. Other patients were treated similarly. And it all started with a housekeeper who decided to plant a garden. But now he has something he didn't have before. He has a reason to get up every morning. Emily changed her life too. She resigned from 2 of her board positions. She reduced her work hours. Now she visits her father every week, not every month. And every time she comes, she works in the garden with him. The first time Emily planted something, she was clumsy. She didn't know how to hold the shovel. She didn't know how much to water. She didn't know anything. But her father taught her. He taught her how to prepare the soil. He taught her how to plant the seeds at the right depth. He taught her how to talk to the plants, like Carol used to do. And while she was learning, Emily discovered something. She discovered that her hands, the same hands that signed multi-million-dollar contracts, could also create life. She discovered that her heart, the same heart that had hardened with years of business, could still feel the tenderness of seeing a plant sprout. She discovered that she had spent too many years pursuing the wrong success. Now, every Saturday, Emily drives 2 hours to get to her father's house. She takes off her executive suit, she puts on old clothes, and she works in the garden until the sun goes down. Sometimes they talk, sometimes they work in silence, but always, they end the day eating something they harvested together. It's the ritual that Carol would have loved. And somehow, Emily feels her mother is right there with them, in the roses, in the tomatoes, in every flower that blooms. She no longer sends money for others to care for him. Now, she cares for him herself. Hope still works at the house, but she's no longer just the cleaning lady. She's part of the family now. Emily offered her a huge raise. She offered her an official title as caregiver. She offered health insurance, paid vacation, everything that money could buy. Hope accepted some things. She declined others. The only thing she asked for was something that didn't cost money. She asked to continue arriving an hour early, to work in the garden. At the entrance to the garden, there's now a small plaque. Emily had it made as a birthday gift for her father. The plaque reads, "Carol's Garden, planted with love by Hope," and underneath, in smaller letters, "So that those we love never truly die, as long as their flowers still live." Every time Mr. Abernathy sees that plaque, he smiles. And every time Hope sees that plaque, she thinks of her own father. She no longer feels guilt. She no longer feels like she failed him. For 26 years, that weight had crushed her every morning. She woke up thinking about what she should have done every night. She fell asleep thinking about what could have been different. But now, when she looks at the garden she helped bring back to life, when she sees Mr. Abernathy smile as he harvests the tomatoes, when she hears his laughter as he tells stories of Carol, something inside her heals. She couldn't save her father. That's true, and that wound will never completely disappear. But she saved another, and sometimes that's enough. Sometimes. Second chances don't come in the form we expect. Sometimes. We can't fix our own mistakes, but we can prevent someone else from making the same ones. Hope couldn't give her father back his will to live, but she did give it back to Mr. Abernathy. And maybe, just maybe, her father is watching her from somewhere. Maybe he's proud of her. Maybe he can finally rest in peace, knowing that his daughter learned the lesson he couldn't teach her in life, that sometimes all a wilting person needs is someone to water them, with patience, with consistency, with love. That sometimes, the most powerful medicine, doesn't come in a bottle. It comes in a seed, and sometimes that's enough. Sometimes healing doesn't come in pills or therapies. It comes in seeds, in soil, in hands willing to get dirty. Sometimes angels don't have wings, they have blue aprons and yellow gloves. And sometimes miracles don't fall from the sky. We plant them ourselves, one seed at a time. This is the story of Mr. Abernathy, a man who lost his will to live when he lost the love of his life, a man who the doctors had given up on, a man who everyone thought was going to die of grief. This is the story of Hope, a housekeeper who carried 26 years of guilt on her shoulders, a woman who had lost her own father to the same invisible illness, a woman who decided that she wasn't going to let history repeat itself. And this is the story of a garden that died when Carol died, a garden that everyone had abandoned, a garden that a woman with calloused hands and a heart full of love decided to resurrect, a garden that saved a life. And if you're listening to this, I want you to ask yourself a question. Is there someone in your life who's wilting? Is there someone who has lost their will to live? Is there someone who needs someone to plant a seed of hope in their heart? You don't need to be a psychologist. You don't need to be a therapist. You don't need to have a degree. You just need hands willing to get dirty and a heart that understands the pain. Because sometimes that's all it takes to save a life. Mr. Abernathy is 80 years old now. It's been a year since Carol passed away, and for the first time, he can talk about her without crying. He tells stories about their 50 years together. He tells how they met at that county fair. He tells how he bought roses and ended up marrying the woman who sold them. He tells how they built their house, their garden, their life. He shows the old photos. He points to Carol in each one. He sees how young and beautiful she was. He sees how they grew old together, and he smiles. He laughs with the memories. He laughs when he tells the jokes she used to make. He laughs when he remembers their silly fights and their sweet reconciliations. The pain hasn't disappeared. It will never disappear. When you love someone for 50 years, the pain of losing them is forever, but now the pain comes accompanied by gratitude. Gratitude for the years they had, gratitude for the memories they shared, gratitude for the love they built, and that makes all the difference. He's no longer trapped in the darkness of grief. Now, he can see the light. There are days when he still talks to Carol. He sits next to the rosebush, the same rosebush that Hope planted with the seed she had saved, and he tells her about his day. He tells her about the tomatoes he harvested. He tells her about Emily, who now comes every week. He tells her about Hope, the woman who gave him back his will to live, and when the wind moves the leaves of the rosebush. Mr. Abernathy smiles, because he knows that Carol is listening. Somehow, from somewhere, she's still there. In every rose that blooms, in every tomato that ripens, in every seed that germinates. Carol is still alive in her garden, and as long as the garden stays alive, so will she. And all because a housekeeper saw a dying garden and decided that she wasn't going to let it die. This story shouldn't exist, but it does. And if this one exists, maybe there are others. Other people who are being saved in silence by heroes that no one recognizes. Look around you. Look at the people who clean, who cook, who care, who work in silence while the world spins without noticing them. Look at the lady who cleans your office, at the gardener who takes care of the park in your neighborhood, at the nurse who works the night shift at the hospital, at the cook who prepares the food in the restaurant on the corner. Look at all those people that the world ignores, that society underestimates, that earn little and work a lot. Maybe one of them is saving a life right now. Maybe one of them is doing exactly what Hope did. Maybe one of them is planting seeds of hope in a heart that everyone had given up for dead. And maybe you could be one of them too. You don't need money. You don't need power. You don't need recognition. You just need to see someone who's wilting and decide that you're not going to let them die. A seed, a song, an hour a day. That was all Hope had. And that was enough to save a life. Now, I ask you, what do you have? And what are you going to do with it? Think about it. And then act, because somewhere out there's a dying garden waiting for someone to make it bloom. And that someone could be you. Thank you for listening to this story until the very end. I know it was long. I know I asked for many minutes of your life. But if you've made it this far, it's because something in this story touched you. Something about Hope reminded you of someone. Something about Mr. Abernathy made you think of someone you know. And that's worth more than any like or any share. If it touched your heart, leave me a comment. Tell me about that person who needs someone to plant hope in their life. And if you know someone who's going through a difficult time, share this video with them. Sometimes the stories we hear give us the courage to do what we need to do. This was the story of Hope, the housekeeper that no one expected, the woman who came to clean and ended up healing, the silent heroine who planted a garden in the barren land of grief and saved a life, one seed at a time.